Hello and welcome back to Analysis. Tonight we're discussing the situation in Bangladesh after a violent electional day. In the studio here we have Murad Qureshi, a member of the London Assembly, John Kamak, who's a barrister involved in legal matters in Bangladesh, Tahel Jamil, the Bangladesh Crisis Group, and on Skype we have Brad Adams, Executive Director of the Human Rights Watch Asia's Division, and on the phone from Bangladesh, Biswajit Chanda, Assistant Professor at the University of Rajshahi in Bangladesh. Our producers also spoke to Professor David Lewis, who is head of the Social Policy Department at the LSE. He thinks the opposition party made a political miscalculation by not taking part in the vote.
The government is legitimate in the sense that something like an estimated 40% voter turnout in an election has taken place. 40%, if that's true, is very low, but it is a substantial number of people who have voted. But of course, if the opposition has boycotted the election, as they have, the main opposition, then there is clearly a big problem with the credibility of the new government. So, I think it's a really unfortunate situation, and probably there has to be a negotiation now to hold another election on terms that will allow the opposition to take part. But I think, in my view, the opposition made a political miscalculation by not taking part.
Brad, I hope you've heard those comments by David Lewis from LSE. What's your take on that?
Well, as a human rights group, we don't advise political parties on whether to participate in elections. But I'll say this, that the environment for free and fair elections was not present. And so it is reasonable for a party to stay out. The problem here, of course, is there's hypocrisy all around. It was the Awami League that demanded the caretaker system in the first place. The BNP was against it. The Awami League certainly demanded it last time because they didn't trust the electoral apparatus. And now it's the BNP demanding the caretaker system and the Awami League opposing it. Again, it shows that these are possible after all. They are really just measures of political advantage for each party. And they're doing the people of Bangladesh a very great disservice, because instead of the festival of democracy, as people often describe Bangladeshi elections, it's just been a very violent period where lots of people have died and nothing is resolved. There will have to be another election. Even senior members of the Awami League say that. It's just a question of when it happens, and really which of the two women who lead the two major political parties blinks first and makes concessions to the other one. The last thing I'd say is I do think it's very important for there to be a very high-level international mediation right now. I don't think that the conditions exist in Bangladeshi politics internally for this to be resolved. I do think there needs to be outside pressure, and somebody very important, very senior, very well-known, very respected, needs to take the lead, whether on behalf of the United Nations or on behalf of some kind of group of friendly countries.
Brad, I realize you have to leave us now. Thank you for those comments, and we'll take them up with the guests in the studio. But before we do so, I would like now to bring in Christine Gent. Christine's on the phone from Brighton, and Christine has a textile business that's trading in Bangladesh. So what we would like to know, Christine, is how has the current political instability affected your business?
It's crippling. It's really crippling. The suppliers that I'm working with now, both with my own business and with Peopletree, who I advise, both of them, they're actually hit the depths of depression. We're trying to run an ethical and fair trade business, and we're being stopped. In this situation, it has been going on for over a year now, and we had hoped that with the election, at least this ridiculous situation where normal people are not allowed to go to work. And this has been going on for so long now that it's really crippling trade. I was in Tirupur in India just before Christmas, and the business there is growing as they pick up the orders which are being pulled from Bangladesh. So people are not able to go to work, people are not able to deliver on their orders. And this is a significant part of the export trade that's being really crippled.
I understand, Christine, you mainly employ women, if that's correct. What sort of impact will this decline in trade have on family life, do you think?
One of the parts of my job is to go out to communities. We work with particularly with disadvantaged women communities, and especially go out and work with women, is to go out and check that they're being paid properly. And one of the things I always do is check on how much people owe, how much their debt is, because that is part of looking at the wages and how that's measured. And time again, I meet families who are on really small incomes who are owing thousands and thousands of dollars, often to family members, sometimes to money lenders, who they're paid to get out of the country, and that is only going to increase. That desperation to leave is just increasing.
Thank you very much indeed for that insight. Tala, Brad talked about the need for new elections. Is it likely we're going to have new elections, or is it likely we'll have a military intervention, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I will come to that in a minute. If I may first, I think one of the problems that I was saying is, in Bangladesh, the difficulty you have is an absence of a genuine intelligentsia. And I give you an example. We have a gentleman here, Biswajit Chandan, who is assistant professor at Rajshahi, which has huge influence of one of the opposition movement, Jamaat's student wing. And he spoke about the spirit of freedom, freedom fight in 1971. And in that he framed about those who are pro-independence and those who are pro-Pakistan. And I think it is despicable that in 42 years after the independence of the country, and in the absence of concrete evidence to label Bangladeshis, 5, 10, 15, 20% of Bangladeshis, that they are pro-Pakistani and they are against the independence of Bangladesh. And I don't think that helps. And that is a major issue. Coming back to...
No, but first of all, let me, Biswaj, I hope you heard that comment by Tala, and I'd like you to respond to it.
Hello. Actually, if the trial of war crimes would take place in 1972 or 73 or 75, then after 42 years, this question would not arise, as that issue has not yet been solved, and most of the people of Bangladesh, they want the trial of those crimes against humanity. This has become the main issue, and the conflict between these two parties. Actually, the main reason behind the conflict is this trial.
Biswaj, we're having difficulty with the line from Bangladesh, so I think we've got your point, but I'd just like to bring John in now for comment on this, and then we can come back to the broader question. And Murad, please.
I think it's extraordinary that we are still talking about the trials of people who allegedly committed crimes 42 years ago. It is unbelievable that a country as populous and as poor as Bangladesh is still has got this hang-up about these trials and about vengeance and retribution. These trials have torn the country asunder, and what these trials have done, as I said earlier on, is that they have created a scenario that creates martyrdom. Now, that can be used as a Trojan horse by any type of extremist group. So whereas my friend here was talking about the possibility of military intervention, that spectre becomes bigger and bigger and more frightening as every day goes by. Mm-hmm. It's all very well for the professor from the LSE to say that that was a legitimate election win within the rules of the Constitution. Yes, it was. But morally, no. I don't... Yeah, all right, it was perhaps a little petulant and maybe churlish of the BNP not to stand. Polls over the last year suggest they would have won. But as Brad Adams pointed out, the tools for a fair and free election were not in place. And so you have this dreadful situation now where you have a government which has been elected on only about 20% of the populace, which doesn't have moral authority, and you see these trials going on in the background, continually, provoking ill feeling and violence, particularly within the Muslim community. Bangladesh right now is on course for disaster unless, and I totally agree with Brad Adams, somebody with worldwide respect and authority can come in and bang those two heads together.
But we'll say, Murad, given the tendency to bring the past into the future, do you think there's space in Bangladesh for a South African type Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that the past can be dealt with in one go and people can move on politically?
Last time I appeared on this show, I did. It was actually the same week that Mandiba had passed away, and I sincerely hoped that was the case. I can't see that at this present time and moment, but there are negotiations happening between the parties, and we've had already the opening soirees of interventions. I mean, interestingly enough, Sheikh Hasina has already offered an election. Khaleda Zia has come back and said yes, but her son here in London has said no. And one of the conditions that have been laid down is the BNP not to be involved with the Jamaat party. Now that would be interesting to see how far that can be swallowed as a political deal, because we do need to get to another election. And there's no doubt Dave is right from the LSC that if the BNP had contested the elections, they'd have done much better than people realise. For the simple reason the polls were in favour of them in the local government sense, although they did lose a lot of support on some of the street violence aimed at people using the public streets.
You're disagreeing.
Those who think that BNP could have participated and won that election, I am sorry, with the greatest of respect, they fail to understand the reality on the ground in Bangladesh. If there were respect for genuine, open, participatory democracy, we would have seen better efforts from the Bangladesh government. You have seen the clip of Sheikh Hasina here. She spoke, she said, we given them opportunity, they didn't take it. The election happened. If they want to, if they think they have lost out, they need to make the initiative. She has shown absolutely no desire to recognize what has happened. Here's another issue. Even if I accept David Lewis's comment about 40% turning out to vote, only 147 out of 300 went to the poll. The others were elected unopposed. So even if 40% turned out, that's at best 20% of the electorate, not all of whom voted Awami League. And it's not a number with which you can govern.
Can I just bring Christine back? Christine, are you still with us?
Yes.
Good. You've been listening to the studio discussion, the complexities of the past and the current tensions. What hope does that give you as someone who's trying to improve the situation on the ground in the country and improve trade? Would you like to comment on that?
Right now, I really don't see it improving in the short term unless this whole situation is resolved. And I see both political parties have been in power for alternatively for such a long time. My feeling is that we need a clean brush. We need people, everyday people in Bangladesh want to get on with their work. They're not interested. They really want their lives to resolve. They want to work hard and get a better job and live in a stable country. And they don't want this political infighting, which is at their expense.
So how do we move on?
Yeah.
I think the electorate have been clear about this, actually. For example, when they have gone to the ballot box, they haven't yet given one of the political parties 2 consecutive terms, and that's quite clear why. And at the same time, I think the economy is the key to this. The economy, in spite of the government, bubbles along at 5 to 7% GDP growth. It could quite easily get to 10. Without too much fuss or bother. And I think that's the litmus test. And it's not just the garment industry that needs to be defended, protected and encouraged. You know, you've got things like the shipbuilding industry, which have come back from emerged out of dealing with ship breaking on the coastline. Now that kind of stuff is encouraging. I think the balance has to be between the economic, looking into the future, the present, and the past. Unfortunately, the past is a bit like it's an albatross we've just got to deal with, as I said earlier, and it's a bit like Europe getting to terms with the Holocaust, and that's how it's seen in Bengali culture, and there's no two ways about it. It's very hard for outsiders to see that, but that's how it's seen.
Christine, I'm sorry, I cut you off. You were going to say how you thought things should move on. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I'm not a political animal, and I'm not engaged with the political debate, but it does seem to me, by the reflection that people do participate in the elections to date, that people do want to see change. And when they do want to see change, they don't want to see change just in the party. They want to see change in the way the country's run. And I don't think they're getting that delivered through the election. And I think that's what's come to a head now in this last year. They're not actually seeing the change that they want through the political election process. And I just hope that can come about, really, because people are fed up with the situation, really, really, truly fed up with it.
John, is it a matter of elections, fair and free, or is it also the problem of the institutions? Because you referred to how the law or the judiciary is subjected to the political factions, you might say, in the country. How big a challenge is rebuilding institutions that can deliver democracy?
Well, it's a huge challenge, but of course, before you attempt to meet that challenge and make any change, you have to accept that change is required. And I think there's little evidence, certainly within the Awami League, there is little evidence that they are aware or believe that any change needs to take place. You're right, the constitutional institutions have been abused. There have been so many decisions taken unilaterally by this government which have really assaulted the constitution of Bangladesh. And I'm not just talking about war crimes trials or about the government doing away with the caretaker government system between elections. I think your guest just now referred to how this intransigence is affecting people at grassroots. These Hartals strikes have been going on for about 12 months. They're crippling people. When will those in power actually get to grips? I think we've heard that GDP could be dropping to about 5% this year. It's a catastrophe. Unfortunately, in a country like Bangladesh, violence all too frequently seems to be the only way that people let off steam. My fear is that before constitutional change is effected, there's going to be a lot more violence, which could lead to a military government and could take Bangladesh back decades. My fear is that that scenario could well occur well before we see any maturity within the way that country is governed.
Professor Chanda, I hope you heard that. And I just wonder if you share the fear John has expressed of greater violence.
Can you please put a question before me in that regard, please? Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. Yes, please carry.
With regard to the violence?
Yes. Would you share John's fear that we're going to witness greater violence?
Okay, and the violence actually which is taking place right now, it's really serious. And at the beginning of the program, you showed something. I heard over the telephone. There are petrol bombs on buses, trains, and other vehicles, and also on rickshaws even. And people, general people, they I'm sorry, I couldn't. Maybe Christine was talking about. and that general people, they don't care about the elections, about the power, and about...
Sir Chanda, I'm sorry, we're having great difficulty with the line and hearing you clearly. I'm going to have to return to the studio. Murat, do you want to...
Yeah, I just, in response to some of the comments John's made, I mean, we've also, yes, there has been a lot of violence. It's been on a daily basis for a year and what have you, but largely it's been a political tactic of the opposition on the streets to paralyse the streets and move people's movements. And that has, I mean, if you're going to point a finger, that's got to be to the BNP. The constitution of Bangladesh is actually, quite frankly, I'm glad we've got there is a constitution in Bangladesh, and I wish we had one here in Britain. And custom norms, yes, could be vastly improved, but they could be vastly improved here. I mean, this country is run by gentlemen's agreement, for God's sake, and what we've got to get to, though, is some acceptance of the norms and practices that we expect amongst institutions.
What's the point of the Constitution if the government just willy-nilly changes it to advance their own political advantage?
Actually, but the point there is having an active opposition that turns up to the Parliament and opposes it. At the time, after 2008, they had a two-thirds majority.
But they
That's
couldn't
what's
oppose
happened.
it. When the government did away with the caretaker government system in 2010,
some BNP MPs were MPs were elected. They should have done a half-decent job and turned up to their commons and actually protested about it. They didn't even bother doing that.
Can
I am surprised at some of Murad's assertion. First of all, he's pointing at BNP. I do not speak for BNP. I have no relation with them. But if you really want to point the finger, you go to people's houses, you ruin their houses, you kill in hundreds, and you expect them to still put their hands up and say, sorry, we're just going to kiss you and love you and hug you. It's not going to happen. The reason we have violence is because the government has taken a step. Government has taken very oppressive measures. But moving on, I think what needs to...
One sentence from each of you.
I think what needs to happen...
What's to happen,
I think
please.
what needs to happen is, in Britain, we're very fortunate in the sense that both political parties has huge influence here. And I think we should engage with them and try to influence the mindset of those people.
So more engagement from here. John.
I think Hasina has to accept that she doesn't have moral legitimacy. She and Khaleda Zia need to get together and inject a bit of maturity into the negotiation, and so that people who Christine were talking about have got a better future.
The Probashi clearly can have an influence. That's those of us abroad, and I'm sure we will exert it, particularly on the economy. But the political culture, I think, is far from changing, and I dare say we've got to move the personalities on.
Christine, 10 seconds. Give us the solution.
I personally believe that both Sheikh Hasina and Khaleda Zia need to move on, let their own parties having new blood come in fresh, get some reconciliation in there, and let ordinary people get on resolving what is a beautiful country in which the vast majority of people do not want violence and really just want to get on with their lives.
Thank you to all our guests, both online and in the studio. That's all we have time for tonight. Hope you will join us again. Thank you.